Then I bring it back to the board for discussion. Or motion.
Madam Chair, this has been a long day, it's a tough day. I want to thank everybody for being here. I've been struggling all day with this. There's a big feedback on this whole process here. But at the end of the day, I will be making a motion, but if somebody else wants to make a comment on the motion,
Okay.
I'll allow that without
Would you like the comments? Would you like the comments right now? All right, well, I can start. Well, I'm going to agree with Commissioner right now. It has been a very long day. We started this at 9 o'clock this morning, and it's now 10:38. And so first of all, before we get going, we'd just like to thank everyone for coming. Everyone in the audience, everyone who's a member of the public, whether you were a supporter or opponent, or whether you're part of the applicant's representatives, would like to thank you all for coming. It is a very important part of the process. And I think at one point it was stated today that as you go through the comprehensive plan, and I think this is why sometimes we struggle, there's all sorts of policies and goals in here that support, that either support or not support the land use application. And I think, as we go through this, and I think we took a really good made a really good effort to listen to the public and listen to everybody here about their concerns and their comments. And the reality is that there is a state statute that requires us to go through a certain process, and we have to actually approve the land use application if the applicant has met the burden of proof for those essentially 5 things that were listed and that have been stated a few times today. But it's basically boils down to compatibility with the existing and future surrounding land uses, consistency with the area, whether it's existing and future land use areas, and then our ability to mitigate should we feel that there are negative impacts so that we can ensure adequate protection of the health, welfare, and safety of the surrounding area, which means a lot of area. So I think as we went through this, at least for me, going through it and looking at the comprehensive plan and our zoning ordinances and looking at all of the conditions of approval and development standards, of which there's no less than about 40 or so conditions of approval and about 50 or actually 55 or so development standards. I think that's a lot to be putting on so that we could mitigate for the health, welfare, and safety. And I think going through and addressing the noise, the traffic, the pretty much everything. The drainage, the list just goes all the way through here. The emergency action plan, everything that we continue to add on with regard, especially to the noise standard and things and changes that we make. I for one am going to support it. And I would go through and just state that as I was going through and trying to find findings to support a motion of approval, I would direct the board and use in section 23-2-230B1. It talks about the proposal is consistent with chapter 22 and other applicable code provisions. Chapter 22 is essentially our comprehensive land use plan. And in our comprehensive land use plan, if you go into the agricultural section of it, it speaks specifically, prior to even getting to the goals, it speaks specifically to the intent of the agricultural goals is to protect private property owners to convert their agricultural lands to other uses. I know everybody always thinks that means, we have to have everything remain in agriculture, and the reality is that doesn't happen that way. And there was a lot of comments here about right to farm, and I actually was on the board when we included the right to farm statement in our comprehensive plan, and when we started including it as a note on the plat. And the comment about that the right to farm statement does not mean that it's an obligation to farm is accurate. It was really put there so that people who move out into the country understand that we still are an agricultural county, that we're still, the number 1 agricultural producing county in the state, and that they need to understand that yes, the dairy farm is there. At that time I owned a dairy farm, that yes, the dairy farm is there, and there's gonna be certain things that are gonna impact you, so when you move out to the country, the first thing you should be trying to do is change the country to look like the city. So, again, the Right to Farm Act is really not a obligation of the farmer to continue farming, but it was really so that people who move out to the country have an understanding that farming is going to occur, and they just, you know, as silly as it sounds, it's just like having to tell people that the coffee is hot when you get it at McDonald's. There's farming that goes on in Weld County because of our agricultural production. That's also why we're adding on the statement with regard to the minerals, because again, as silly to me as it sounds, there are a lot of people who don't understand there's a lot of oil and gas activity in our county. So, with that being said, I would go through and going through looking at it. In our comprehensive plan, to support this application, we can look at goal A7. It talks about county land use regulations should protect the individual property owner's right to request a land use change, and I believe that's essentially what's occurring here. And it goes on to say that county land use regulations support commercial and industrial uses. So again, I think that's what we're looking at here. There's also goal A8, which talks about ensuring the adequate services and facilities are currently available or reasonably attainable to accommodate the requested new land use change. And I think, and then there's also about goal A9, which talks about reducing potential conflicts between various land uses in the conversion of traditional agricultural lands to other lands. And I think as you go through there and look at the corridor, this was one of the comments that I made earlier, was that looking at the corridor, we all drive that corridor. Maybe I don't drive it every day, but I drive it quite a bit on my way to Johnstown, because that's where my daughter lives. You know, there's a lot of commercial development, there's a lot of industrial development, there's a lot of residential development. And for those of you who have ever listened to me talk about residential development out in the country, I'm usually a no on that, because I think it does conflict with agricultural properties. But, you know, as we get through here, the thing that I was having real difficulty with the town of Johnstown is they have already approved, without requiring mitigation, essentially, they already approved the land use that's gonna put 28,000 vehicles at that intersection of Highway 34 and Road 13, and didn't bother to mitigate it. I think everybody else is supposed to be mitigating it. You know, I think for Johnstown to come to us and say that they don't think we should approve this because it just doesn't fit with their plans, when they haven't even updated their plans since 2006, I just don't understand that at all. But as you look at that corridor, it is light industrial, it is farming, it is commercial, it is residential, and I think the corridor is changing that way, and will continue to change that way. I think with the mitigations that are put in place with regard to the landscaping and the screening, I think this will look good. I would agree with some of the folks in the public that spoke about the entryway on Highway 85, because I drive that way almost every day. And there are some areas there that need some cleaning up, but quite frankly, there's a new wastewater treatment facility that's occurring right at Weld County Road 2, between 2 and 6 on Highway 85 that cleaned up the area substantially, and it's a wastewater treatment facility. I know we have a lot of people who got up and said, you know, would you want to live next to this, or would you want to live next to something else? Talked about that they didn't like oil and gas, they didn't like a lot of things. So I just want everybody to know that where I live, my backyard, is the North Glen Wastewater Treatment Facility. That's been there since 1989. It came in right next to the dairy farm that I own. I also have a rail line that goes through, and currently there are 4 oil and gas facilities that are within close proximity to where I live, not to mention the towers. The radio towers that are just on the 35 acres to the south of me, and not to mention Tri-State's huge transmission line that is just a half mile north of where I live, or not to mention the high-pressure gas lines that run through my property that serve all the urban areas in the Front Range. Additionally, other policies and goals that I find that support this is the industrial goals, and it's industrial goal 1, which says to promote the location of industrial uses in urban areas, in intergovernmental agreement areas with urban growth areas, and growth management areas, in regional urban areas, in urban development nodes, and along railroad infrastructure or where adequate services are currently available or reasonably obtainable. I'd also say that having the rail line in this area, I mean, a lot of people associate rail lines with industrial uses already, I would say that in a lot of our planning and intergovernmental agreements, in fact, we have an intergovernmental agreement in place with the city of Greeley that is all around the railroad and the development along it, and most of it is all slated to be industrial type development. Also, if you look at goal I3, I think that supports the plan where it talks about the transportation infrastructure. And then there's also goal 4, I4, which talks about all new industrial development should pay its own way. And in this case, I think Martin Marietta has demonstrated, and we have solidified it within the conditions of approval and development standards that it will pay for its own way. I wish some of the other development in the corridor that's not under our purview would pay for their way. Also, there's other goals within the industrial development that talk about compatibilities between industrial uses, especially on marijuana railroad lines, and other uses. I think as you go through and look at it, it talks about whether or not it's compatible with existing surrounding land uses and future land uses. Those are a couple of things that we have to, criteria that we have to look at. And again, as I've already stated, if you look at the whole corridor, it's already industrialized, it's already commercialized, and it's already essentially urban development and residential development. I think this does fit in with it. So for those reasons, I will be supporting the application. Who would like to go next? Okay.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody here who's waited this out. Many of you had to go through very, very long hearings. And I just first and foremost want to thank you. Thank you for participating in the process. I believe your participation has made this better. And I'll highlight some of it as I go through my remarks. I want to thank you. I want to thank the applicant for their willingness to incorporate those things that are above and beyond in terms of what they might have to do in order to move this USR. Our job up here is to separate the emotion from the science and facts. And this has been obviously one of the most controversial USRs I've had in my almost 7 years as a county commissioner. I've taken a lot of time on this. In fact, I was out driving yesterday. I spent several hours out driving the corridor and looking at it. And, spent a considerable amount of time prior to this reading materials, going through that process and seeing, really where we at. There was a comment made earlier today that fear is sometimes greater than reality. And I think that's very true. And I want to hit upon where your participation has really, I think, impacted this process and hopefully made it better. But I want to tell you where I sit before I tell you where I stand. I recently moved from West Greeley. I downsized, my wife and I downsized. We bought a condo over near 10th Street over here. Can you hear me? In 38. It's about a mile, less than a mile from the 35th facility. And I have my concerns, like many of you have out there, that I'm getting really close to the 35th site out there. What kind of impacts am I gonna see? And I got to tell you, been there for several months. I can overlook the pit from my second floor balcony. I go out there every single night. It's one of my favorite quiet times where I kind of down zone. I've never once smelled any odor. I've never had any noise. I could barely make out the pit at night. The lighting is such that if you didn't know that pit was there, you wouldn't know it was there. And it kind of hit home to me a couple of weeks ago. This has obviously been a controversial item. Obviously, different opinions, which is understandable. That was brought up earlier today in some of the public testimony. My brother-in-law came from out of town, and he used to visit our house out in West Greeley, which was right off of Highway 34. And he made a comment to me as we were sitting out there enjoying our iced tea and the evening. And he made a comment to me that kind of hit home. He said, I can't believe how quiet your neighborhood is compared to the neighborhood you used to live in. See, back out in West Greeley by Highway 34, that we could hear the traffic. And as we all know, the traffic on Highway 34 has exponentially increased. And he made a point to me. I never noticed it because I lived there and it was just part of the background noise in terms of things. But he said, I can't believe your neighborhood is. And I mentioned to him, did you know that you had an asphalt plant? Literally, see those dim lights over there? That's an asphalt plant. And he goes, I can't believe it. Because I would have never realized that facility could operate this close to a residential neighborhood. I'd like to talk about Phil. I asked Phil over here, and I did do my investigation, and I knew the answer to the question. Wanted to have that public input that since 2001, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, if I get the numbers right. From 2001 to 2015, this background, we had 0 complaints of noise and odor. I now live in that neighborhood, and I've talked to neighbors who've lived out there many years, more than I have. And I will tell you, I can verify that, because I live in that neighborhood, and I see it firsthand every single day. So let me tell you why I think some of the things you accomplished here tonight, and I want to give the opposition group great credit. You took time, you engaged, and let me tell you what we were able to accomplish because of your involvement tonight. We mitigated the hours of operation. We mitigated the noise. We brought it down. I asked for, what are some of the mitigation things? If this project's going to go forward, I asked each and every one of you and asked the opposition group, what are some of the things that you do? So one of the things that was asked in the final public comment period was we'd like a residential noise standard. You now have that at 5550. We addressed the traffic and sound in terms of some of the triggers in terms of that. There were health officials here that are very credible, honorable folks that, as said, we have no dog in this fight, that addressed a lot of issues and concerns that you all legitimately have in terms of what kind of ambient dust is going to be there, potential metals in the air that would impact organic farming, and the testimony that was clearly there that this will not have an impact. We set up the idea of the community working group. I don't know whose idea was that. I don't know if it was originally Martin Marietta's or the Citizens Group. But now you're going to have quarterly meetings. You're going to have a fund for landscaping and mitigation purposes. You're going to have an emergency plan that you all are going to be able to review. The fire district's going to be involved in making sure that equipment is on, and I think all of those are very legitimate issues. So at the end of the day, we live in a modern society. We like to drive on our roads. We like to build houses. We like to go to our shopping centers. That is part of modern life. And the offset of that is you've got to have aggregate. This board has spent a tremendous amount of time dealing with I-25, looking on that issue. Both Commissioner Kirkmeyer and I sit on the transportation planning entities in this region. North formed the North I-25 Coalition to get that third lane done. Folks, it just doesn't happen without those materials. And we had expert after expert, people in the business saying it had no relation. Some weren't even customers to Martin. Had any tie to Martin area, and said, look, aggregate is becoming a harder problem. We're a growing region. We need this in order to grow, like we all want in terms of Weld County, have nice homes,